when no one understands me, when everything I do is wrong, you give me hope and consolation. You give me strength to carry on. I guess I'll never know the reason why you love me as you do. That's the wonder of you. Awesome job on that, my friend. I've been asking for that for 4 years. Thank you very much. So why will you ask for that? Because in my estimation, it is one of the most beautiful hymns ever written if you sing it to God. Think about it. When no one understands me, you do. When everything I do is wrong, you still love me. You still care. I think it's an amazing, wonderful hymn. It also, in my estimation, is one of the most beautiful love songs ever written because it speaks to the purity of love. You see, if you love me because of what I do, what happens when I do something else? If you love me for what I think, what happens if I grow and change and my thinking changes? If you love me for what I feel, you do know that emotions can vary on any given day. If you love me for what I believe, well, as I grow, I may believe something differently too. I want to know that you love me, the real me, the one that I typically would hide from all those people around me for fear of being rejected. And that's why it's a wondrous thing if someone can see all of that and love you for who you are. We crave it. I remember several years ago, an undergraduate down in Alabama, he was a big man on campus. The guy was brilliant, he was handsome, he was driven, obviously had a great future ahead of him, and by the way, has had one. And he hardly dated anybody. And I said to him one day, all your buddies have girlfriends, why don't you? Are you just too focused on your studies, whatever? He said, no. I just haven't found one who understands me. And I'm not about to have a relationship until I feel that she understands me. But that's not just in that kind of relationship. It's in all kinds of relationships. For example, if you have a teenager that begins to pull away from you as a parent or begins to rebel, you know that if you have a conversation about that, if your teen will be honest with you, somewhere in that conversation, he or she is going to say, you don't understand me. You know what you want me to be. You know what you want me to think. You know what you want me to feel, to believe. You know what you want me to do. You know what you don't know? You don't know me. Can you just love me as I am without having to meet your criteria in some fashion? Oh, and it definitely happens in marriage. I mean, think about it. A couple, when they're in the courtship period, is all exciting and intense and all those kinds of things, which can sweep you into the marriage and even sweep you a year or two into the marriage. And then maybe kids come along, you start pursuing your career, all kinds of other things happen that get your attention for a while. And then somewhere down the road, it's not unusual for people to finally say, I don't think my spouse understands me. As a matter of fact, the business that I'm in, we deal with a lot of marriages in crisis, and as you would understand, many of those are where one spouse is straying. And one of the most common things you will hear from a straying spouse is, my spouse just does not understand me. But we crave it. We want it. We want somebody to understand us and accept that and love us as we are. God wanted us to understand that about him, and that's why you read passages like Romans chapter 5, verse 8, which says, while we were yet sinners, God loved us and Christ died for us. In other words, I know when everything you do is wrong. I know all that about you. I understand you and love you anyway. And then we tend to believe that it's hard for somebody else to really understand us unless they have shared some of our experiences. For example, if you had a problem with alcohol and you went to an AA meeting, Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, you'll be in a room full of people who struggle with the same thing you do, and that's where people tend to be a lot more honest and accepting. It's like these people understand what I struggle with. These people understand what I think and what I feel. They understand why I do what I do, sometimes better than I myself. Or just take it out of that, like parents of a handicapped child tend to understand better the parents of another handicapped child. Shared experiences tend to make us feel like this person may understand me. Even God wanted to make sure we understood that, so that If you think about the false gods, the mythical gods, then they're always up there somewhere, and they're demanding and they're commanding, and we're just pawns with which they play. And if one of them winds up on the planet is with some kind of superhuman power, you understand, like in the myths that you read about, or even the blockbuster movies that are made. But when God wanted us to know he understood us through experience, he became one of us. So that when Jesus the Christ came and took that human body, he never worked a single miracle by his own power. Every miracle that Jesus worked was by the power of the Holy Spirit. Even when that body resurrected, it was by the power of the Holy Spirit. He didn't have omniscience anymore. He didn't have all knowledge. He would say things like, well, the angels don't know about that, and I don't even know about that. Only the Father knows about that. In other words, when he became one of us in every shape, fashion, and form, not with some superhuman powers. I mean, he became one of us. You say, why? Well, one of the reasons was so when God says, I understand you, and you go, well, yeah, I have. I came to be one of you so I could understand your experience. Wow, thank you, God. Now, if you look at that and you go, well, are you telling me then, if we're really going to communicate like in a marriage, we have to have the same experiences? And if that were to be true, we're all doomed. You understand that, right? Because we don't all have the same experiences. We had different childhood experiences, different experiences before we met each other, all those kinds of things. You say, well, if I don't have that, all those shared experiences, there's still a way I can understand my spouse and my spouse understand me? And the answer is yes. Now, what I wish to do today is just give you a little bit about that. I'll give you 3 points that hopefully you'll remember. They're not the be-all, end-all. They won't solve all the problems in the world, but they're good, and they really help you understand better about communication. And then later, I'll tell you about how to even get more if you wish. Now, as I go through these, I love acronyms, like, taking letters and making a word, but all 3 of these start with an A, and so that word is So instead of calling it with an acronym, I just call it the AAA communication engine. How about that? So therefore, that is copyrighted. You can't use that. So the AAA communication system. The first one is attune. You say, what does that mean? Well, it means to be in harmony. These instruments up here have to be in harmony. They have to be attuned. Otherwise, you have a cacophony, not music, you understand. You say, well, we attune with another person. If you really want to have a serious conversation, yes, you have to. You say, what does that mean? Yeah, I think probably the most common form of communication in the world today is texting. What do you think? How much real communication do you think takes place with that? For example, have you ever watched those documentaries about like the Civil War, and they read from these letters these guys wrote home, and even the ones that didn't have much education sounded like they were writing poetry, right? Yeah, we don't know how to do that. Our world has changed. We text, we even abbreviate a lot, right? You have to understand what the abbreviation means. You say, well, isn't that a great way to communicate? If you're just trying to get a quick message across, fine, that's no problem. But in my world, where I deal with marriages, we'll have a husband say, well, I sent her a long email, and she reacted poorly to that. Or he'll say, or she'll say, I wrote him a letter, but he didn't react like I thought he would. It's because words that are written are not the same as words that are said. They have much more likelihood of being misunderstood. Even God can't write something everybody understands alike. Would you agree with that or not? You ever heard anybody argue over this? You say, well, you're saying there's a flaw with God? No, I'm saying the flaw is with us. We're human beings, and we tend to hear things differently. If we're really going to communicate, I suggest you do not do it by writing unless that's the only way you can. The best way to do it is face-to-face. No, I'm talking about serious communication. You understand, where we're really trying to understand each other. Face-to-face, that's a whole lot better than on the phone even. Face-to-face, if you can possibly do it. And you say, why? Because if I'm going to say something to you and try to communicate with you, the first thing I do is I'm trying to marshal it together in my head so I can explain it. And then I'm going to try to choose the right words. Anybody else gotten older and miss your vocabulary? I mean, you used to know those words, but now you can't find them anymore. I know there's a word for that. I just don't know what it is. So then you Google it, but you don't know how to Google it because you don't know the word. So you try to get the right words, okay, and then I'm also going to put some other coding with that word. I'm going to put the tone of my voice, the pacing of what I say, my facial expressions, my eyes, my body language, all that. And then I code all of those things and I transfer it to you. And now you're going to try to decode all of that. And if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss something in a hurry. You think that's possible? So when I say attune, I mean I'm really, really focused on you. I'm watching everything. Think about it this way. If you read the sentence, I didn't see the man hit his wife. That's too simple to misunderstand, right? Right? So you're all looking at me like, you're setting us up. We know you're setting us up. And actually, I am. Because if you were having a communication where you're face-to-face and you put those things into words, just the way you change the intonation changes the meaning of the sentence. And so if the guy says, I didn't see the man hit his wife, you're thinking, well, did somebody tell you or did you hear it? Or I didn't see the man hit his wife. Well, did somebody tell you about it or did you hear this time? Or I didn't see the man hit his wife. You mean he slapped somebody else's wife? See, just by changing the intonation, you change the meaning of the sentence. You understand why then it's easier to communicate verbally when you're looking at each other and understanding. Oh, have you also noticed that sometimes the way they encode the message, they'll say one set of words, but everything else belies the words? Ever had anybody look at you and say, I'm sorry, but everything about the way they said it made you believe that's not the case? I mean, like the way they look at you, the sneer on their face, the body language, etc. And you're going, I heard those words, but I don't think that's what's being communicated here. And so if you're going to understand, when you're having a serious conversation, remove the distractions. Don't even try to do it in a restaurant. Seriously, there's a cosmic rule that waitstaff will come at just the wrong moment. No fault of the waitstaff, they're just trying to take care of you. And so what do? Well, you turn off the phones, you turn off the TV, you turn off the children, you turn off everything. You get with each other, you look at each other if you're going to have a serious conversation. So if we just do that, we'll understand the other person. No, but it's the right first step. We'll say, what's the second A? Ask. Ask rather than assume. We have some Facebook groups with Marriage Helper, and one of them has like 5,500 people in it because we restrict it. If we didn't restrict it, it would have like 55,000 people in it. And this is a group for people where one spouse wants to save the marriage, but their other spouse doesn't. And so these people are hurting, and they're asking for advice and all kinds of things. And so somebody will post something like, why did my husband say that? Or why did my wife do that? And then 15 people tell them exactly why. They don't even know the other person, they don't know the situation, but they know exactly why people do what they do. Let me ask you a question. Do you always know exactly why you do what you do? Have you ever asked yourself the question, why did I do that? Or even worse, why do I keep doing that? We don't always understand our emotions. You understand? If I can always understand my motivations, then I'm certainly not always going to understand your motivations. And if I make an assumption about what your motive is, I've already filtered this, and I'm going to hear it through the way I expect to hear it rather than what you're really saying. And so what do? You ask. Now, if you ask in such a way that the other person feels he or she's being set up, don't expect the truth. If you ask in a way that indicates you're about to have a fight, do not expect the truth. You understand what I mean? I'm talking about genuinely, truly, honestly asking. Even when you think you know the answer, it's still better to ask if you really, truly want to understand the other person. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, you start off talking about how that I want to be understood, but now you're talking about me understanding the other person. Yes, because that's where you start. If you expect to be understood, you must first learn how to understand. Seek first to understand rather than to be understood. You get it? And so, and the questions. I'll give you an example. I got away with it for the first two services, so maybe I will in this one as well. Tom didn't react in the first service, so if you are offended by this, it is Tom's fault. I love doing radio. I love doing call-in radio because you never know what's coming next, right? Never know what the next question is going to be. Oh, also, I love doing radio because my voice is a little deeper. Therefore, they think I'm Fabio. It's when they meet me, they go, not Fabio, Pillsbury Doughboy. That's So I love doing radio, and this guy called in. I was on WLAC, Music Row, Nashville, Tennessee, one night doing a relationship program. It's kind of later at night. And I think, if I remember correctly, the call came from Virginia. And a guy called in, and he said, can you help me figure out how to get a second date? You know, that begs a question, right? What happens on the first date? He said, well, I don't want to be a hypocrite. So on the first date, I tell them that I'm a cross-dresser, that I dress like women occasionally. Now, you've just made an assumption. Assumption stops communication. And so I asked him the next question. I was pretty sure I would know the answer to it because I'm a Christian sexologist, but I asked because I needed to know, not assume. I said, so are you homosexual? And he said, no, I'm straight. Almost all male cross-dressers are straight, by the way. So then I said, so why do you dress like a girl? He answered, but I kept asking more questions, not probing, like, tell me, but just gentle questions until I finally got to a question that led him to tell me a story. He said, when I was a boy, my father used to beat me as if I were a dog. I said, can you tell me one of those stories? Like, just tell me one of those that you remember. On that particular occasion, his father had taken a very thin belt and wore out the man's legs, the young man's legs, the boy's legs, to the point that he was cutting through the blue jeans into the flesh, and the boy was bleeding. And then when the father finished whipping him like that, he said, you don't get to take a bath, you don't get to take off those blue jeans. You sleep on the concrete floor in the garage, where it was cold. And of course, overnight, the blood coagulates. He gets scabs, but they're built into his blue jeans. Are you following the picture? So the next morning, when he finally is allowed to take a bath, he has to peel that off of him with excruciating pain. Now, this was radio. I'm listening to him on the phone. I can't see him, but just in his voice, you could hear the hurt and the pain. And I said, so how does that story apply to you dressing like a girl? He said, well, he never hit my sister. And the only time I feel safe is when I'm dressed like a girl. Now, how many of you just changed your perspective of that guy? I mean, that fast. You changed your picture of that guy that fast. But you would have never done that had you made assumptions. Assuming I understand your motives, even assuming I understand what you just told me, without asking a little further and a little further till you finally got the whole story. Do you see what I'm saying? So I said, okay, here's my suggestion. I appreciate you not wanting to be a hypocrite, I really do, but don't tell them on the first date. I mean, you might not want to date them again, you understand? There's no reason to tell them on the first date. Now, if you go out for a few dates and you think you begin to know her heart and she's knowing your heart and you think maybe a relationship could develop, don't tell her you're a cross-dresser. Tell her that story. Not at a restaurant, face to face. All distractions removed. And as you tell it, allow yourself to relive it in your mind. Allow yourself to see it. He said, why? Because then you'll start feeling some of those same emotions, and that's going to become part of the way you encode it. The pain, the hurt, she'll hear it in the tone of your voice. She'll see it in the pain in your eyes. She'll see your reaction as you shrink back into yourself. In other words, she will have some vision of what you're talking about. And when you get to the end of that story, answer whatever questions she has. And then you say, but he never hit my sister. The only time I feel safe is when I'm dressed like a girl, and sometimes even as a grown man, I do that. I said, if you do it that way, if she understands something about your heart, you understand something about hers, then she's not going to reject you. You understand? Then it's something you together can work through and go forward. So do it that way. You get it? She said, yeah. Even if she doesn't ask the questions, act as if she were. He thanked me, and then I said, one more thing. He said, what's that? I said, try to date women your size. I really did say that. That's just good radio right there, I'm telling you. He laughed. He thanked me. He hung up. I hope he's doing well. But do you understand whatever you assume, I assume I understand your motives, I assume, just ask. But ask not to fight, not to manipulate, not to set up. Ask to truly, truly understand. You say, but what if he or she tells me something I don't want to hear? That's life. The other person's not always going to think like you want them to think, feel like you want them to feel, believe what you want them to believe. You understand that. So then there's the third A. You say, what's that? It's acknowledge. You say, what? Acknowledge. It means I'm going to acknowledge the fact that I'm listening and I understand what you're saying. It doesn't necessarily mean that I agree. So, for example, if Alice were to say something to me like, when you did that, that really hurt my feelings, my first human reaction might be to go, oh, good grief. That was nothing. Get over it. Which, by the way, is not the correct response. I have learned that through experience. You say, well, what do you mean? It means I have just invalidated what she thinks. I've invalidated what she feels. And that's when communication stops. Because now it's going to be an argument, or her trying to convince me, or me trying to convince her. And that's not communication. That's conflict. Now, conflict will occur sometimes, so misunderstand. But what we're trying to do here is to communicate. So what do? Well, I will not take responsibility for anything I didn't do, but I will acknowledge what she feels. So I could say, honestly, I'm so sorry that when I said that, it hurt you. Now, that's an honest response, right? It doesn't mean I meant to hurt you or anything else. I'm not necessarily agreeing, but I'm acknowledging. You say, why is it so important? Because the other person really wants to know that you see it from his or her perspective, that you can see it through my eyes. You can feel it through my heart. Even if you don't agree, can you see my side? Acknowledging, just acknowledging what the other person says and thinks, etc., would change the world. What do you think would happen in Congress if either side actually listened to the other? Oh, they won't necessarily agree immediately, you understand? But if they can just acknowledge, I can see that. That's when you start communicating, because then you're looking for a solution. I love this church. This is an awesome church. This is a great church, and you really did an awesome job with that. I love the worship here. I love listening to Tom. I sit in the back because he's so loud, but I love listening to Tom. I pick on Tom a lot. I really love this church. There was another church I was with. Hey, I'm sure it was a good church, but I don't like those people. And I was in this meeting, and I was in this meeting for an hour and a half. They just kept coming at me. And finally I said to the guy who was leading it, can you not see my perspective? And he said, no. Your perspective is invalid because it doesn't fit the facts. So you just invalidated me, and you expect us to find some kind of agreement to work this thing out? You probably have heard that old parable about the blind men. They come up to an elephant, and the one grabs the elephant's trunk, and he says, it's like a big, thick, rough hose. Another one feels the elephant's leg and goes, no, it's like a big, rough stump. Another one pushes his hands against the elephant's side and says, no, it's like a big leather wall. Another one grabs his tail and goes, no, it's like a rough rope kind of thing. Which one of them is wrong? They're all right from what they are perceiving. Well, if there's going to be any kind of a consensus of working out problems, it can't be, no, you idiot, it's a hose. No, you idiot, it's a wall. It's like, okay, help me understand how you see it as a hose. Help me understand how you see it as a wall, as you follow my point. And you start off then by acknowledging, not necessarily agreeing, by acknowledging. And now you've changed the whole scenario. Because now it's not you trying to force your will on the other person. It doesn't mean you have to abandon what you believe, but you're not trying to force your will on the other person. You're truly listening. You're truly trying to understand. Oh, and understand this as well, that sometimes when you ask questions, and I've skipped that, let me go back to it. Sometimes when you ask questions, they'll give you answers that are not satisfactory. Like if you say, why did you do that? Sometimes the answer will be, I don't know. We talked about that a little bit earlier, right? And the other thing I meant to say there, I forgot, I'm coming back to, is that also understand this. Motives are seldom pure. What I mean by that is motives usually have several things mixed in with them. You follow? You say, well, are there ever absolutely pure motives? Absolutely. Leanne McCoy, Tom's wife, if she's in the front yard with one of her grandkids and a strange dog comes in and tries to attack that kid, the motive will be absolutely pure. I'm saying she won't be considering anything about her own safety. She won't be wondering who's the owner of that dog. Her motivation will be to protect that child, and that'll be a hope. You follow? That dog will die. If you break into my house at 2 a.m., I'll shoot you. You say, but why? Well, it's not a pure motive now. It's more of a mixed motive. Part of it is to protect my family. That's a big part of the motive, but it's not all. Part of it's to protect me. Like, I don't know if you come to hurt me or not. Part of it might be even to protect those paltry possessions that I have. And so there's a whole bunch of things mixed together. Well, why did you do it? Well, there's a whole lot of reasons I did it. Now, the end result is the same. She kills the dog, I kill you. Her motive is pure, mine's mixed. You say, oh, you're a Christian. You wouldn't kill me. Yes, I would. You say, why? Because I'll repent, go to heaven, and you'll still be dead. So the questions that they answer, sometimes even they don't know the answers to. Now, in that acknowledgement part then, so if you're still just talking, trying to work out the solution, etc., this is what real, true communication is. And then you don't walk away going, you just don't understand me. Because you're trying. You're attuning, you're asking, you're acknowledging. And if we both do that, it leads us to amazing levels of communication. Now, you'll understand there's a lot more to this than what I've just shared. That's why we're going to have those 3 classes in the month of October that we'd love for you to enroll with. You pick up this church bulletin. It'll tell you on here somewhere. I can't see without my glasses, but it's somewhere on here. It'll tell you how to go online and enroll. We're setting that class for the middle service, the 9:30 service. If that one fills up, we'll do another one for this service, the last service. If that one fills up, we'll actually do one for the 8:10 service. So please don't enroll for that. I don't want to come here at 8 o'clock every Sunday morning. But if you do, I'll be there because there are a lot more things to talk about. You understand I'm scratching the surface here. For example, remember I talked about experience, how we tend to think that if people have similar experiences, they understand us. Did I already mention to you that people in America, for example, more than 80% of Americans marry somebody of the same ethnicity? Did we mention that already? Now, if we didn't, don't freak out if you've married somebody of a different ethnicity. Up to 20% do. That's not bad. But most people marry somebody of the same ethnicity. Will marry somebody within 5 years of their age. Will marry somebody of a similar socioeconomic background. The very rich marrying the very poor is mostly a fantasy. Somebody of a similar religion, understand in America, Baptists and Methodists would be considered the same religion as opposed to Catholic and Jew. You follow? Okay. You say, well, why do people do that? The theory behind it is we want to marry somebody with enough background similar to mine that we can understand each other. But you've heard it all your life. Birds of a feather flock together. You're much better than the second service. They didn't know that. All right, so. But then when it comes to personality, we tend to marry people of a different personality. For example, how many of you guys who are married, one of you is outgoing and bubbly and impulsive and the life of the party, and the other person is very analytical and precise and reserved? Anybody here have marriages like that? The majority of the marriages are mixed like that. You go, why? Because it's God's cosmic joke. No, the reason why is because we tend to do that to balance ourselves out. Or as you've heard, opposites attract. So in that class, we'll use a lot more humor there than we use here, but we will talk about very serious things and help you to understand. I call the series, Why is Your Spouse So Weird? And if you decide to enroll with that, we'll have a good time. Those 3 Sundays, we'll learn a lot more about communication in marriage. But you don't have to be married to come. Now, if you are married and thinking, well, we're not in crisis, that's fine, come. Learning more about communication is good for any marriage. If you're in trouble, come. If you're single, but you have relationships with people you care about or someday want to be married, come to the class. Because we'll be talking more about how to understand and how to be understood that I just can't cover here in this time. So remember the 3 A's? Attune, ask, acknowledge. That's where you begin. And when that happens, your communication pattern will change dramatically. Now, some do this when you're having serious conversations. It won't apply to every conversation, you understand? Someday I'm going to do some research about what percentage of what percentage of time of American couples is spent trying to answer a question your spouse asks as they walk out of the room. right? What? It won't apply to every relationship. I'm sorry, it will apply to every relationship, but not to every situation. We're talking about those conversations where you truly try to understand. And there is nothing better than attuning, asking, and acknowledging where that you're now actually trying to understand each other. You might not always agree, but you will come closer and closer and closer. When no one understands me, when everything I do is wrong, you give me hope and consolation. You give me strength to carry on. Guess I'll never know the reason why you love me as you do. It's a wonder. It's the wonder of you. You can be that you.